Yes, no?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect. 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 Okay. So I know when I turn mine in, I just go in and I'll check the boxes. You know, if they're needed, you know, I check it. And then if something is not applicable, I just usually will write NA next to it. So that they know it's not missing, it's just not applicable, you know, in this particular listing. Okay. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay, awesome. So the next form is the actual input form through North Star. Okay. So when you're going, you know, when you look at this whole input form, it starts with a disclosure page, which we do need signatures on. But then it goes into, I'm just going to kind of show you many, many pages of the input data, okay, potentially needed for a property, okay? We're not going to go through this whole form, but I'm just showing you that's what it looks like. Have you guys done a listing yet, or have you seen this form? Any questions?
I haven't.
Okay, so it looks pretty intimidating. It's all of the potential information that could be input for properties. Now, again, a lot of it may not apply. There are certain pieces of information that are required. And when you look at the top of this, I'm just going to kind of show you. I'll go back up. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. Right here in this box up here in the corner, it says the dark black square boxes are required, except on comp sold listings. And comp sold listings are maybe you are just helping somebody who already has a buyer. You know, you're just going to list the property and do a purchase agreement at the same time. So it's a listed and pended immediately. But you want it on the MLS so that it's, you know, shows up for comparable purposes, right? That's what they would refer to as kind of a comp sold listing, okay? But for all of their listings, everything that has a black box highlighted around it, those are, you know, required fields, okay? And then the black ovals are required for the comp sold listings and all others. And then if it's just got a white box and that's, you know, not darkened or not blackened, then that's not required. But, you know, in my opinion, the more information you can provide on a listing, the better, okay? But what I wanted to point out on this is more so this first disclosure page, okay? Because we forget to sometimes have the sellers sign that. And this disclosure page is basically, I've highlighted a bunch of information that I want you to know, because this is what you should be explaining to them, is that, you know, by signing this, you're authorizing our brokerage to obviously give the information, you know, to the MLS. The broker is required to promptly provide information to the MLS about any change in status or price to your listing once it's listed. An important one is, under no circumstances can we delete information from the MLS on a listed property in order to conceal any information. You know, once it's on the MLS, obviously our obligation is we have to update it and provide all information, you know, especially when it sells, in regards to the price and terms of that sale. At the request of the broker, unless the seller says no, basically this MLS information is going to get, you know, sent out to the internet, you know, to those websites. And then also at the request of the broker, unless the seller says no, no, the MLS will include the address, you know, of the property, okay, to those websites as well. Make sense? And so when you're having your seller sign this, you want to make sure you're pointing out those important, you know, factors about this disclosure so they know what they're signing, okay? And then you'll want the owners to sign on 102, and if there's more than one, you know, line 104. And then you're going to sign as well. Okay? So let's skip on through all these input forms. Definitely when you have a listing and you need to go through that, you certainly can reach out. You know, I can help you go through it. Lisa can help you go through it. Katie, whoever, any one of our our Agent Leadership Council members as well. Okay. Okay, so the first form, which is obviously the most important form, and we tell you this all the time, is your agency and relationships form. You should be always presenting this form at your first, what they call first substantive contact with your clients, right? So if you're sitting down to do a listing, you shouldn't be doing this form at the same time, because hopefully you've already had this form signed, right? Everybody shake your head yes. So what we want is to make sure that when you're sitting down or talking to sellers for the first time, this form is always presented. And for obviously for today's class purposes, we're just talking about sellers. This is a listing class, okay? So first substantive contact with that seller, when they start telling you they want to sell, they're thinking about selling, and you start talking to them, you're going to bring this form out. And you're going to explain to them that this is a disclosure form only. It is not a contract to hire you or to have you represent them. And that's what I've kind of highlighted in this top paragraph here. This is not a contract. This is an agency disclosure form only. If you desire representation, you must enter into a written contract, okay? And then, until you do enter into that representation contract, you know, you as the agent or an arm of the broker are basically required to treat them as customers, and they will not receive any representation from you until you're hired, okay? That's the important thing with this form, you guys, is they need to know you're required by the state of Minnesota to only act as a facilitator, okay? So when I present this form, I actually just say, hey guys, you know, now that we're getting serious in our discussion here about wanting to sell, I need to go over this form with you. It is a disclosure only. The state of Minnesota requires that I go over the different types of relationships that you can have with a licensed agent or a licensed brokerage, okay? So I need to go over those with you. And I actually like to start on page 2. And I always say, right now, you know, you haven't officially hired me. So by law, I'm required to be a facilitator only, okay? Which means I can open doors, I can provide data, but I cannot act as your representative in any way, shape, or form. So I cannot give you my 25 years of experience and expertise and knowledge, okay? I can just provide you data. So when you hire me, right, using those embedded commands, when you hire me, I then will become your seller's broker. And I flip back to page 1 and I point out line 14, right? So now that you're hired me, I'd become your seller's broker, and I now can advocate for you, look out for your best interest at all times, and basically give you all of my expertise and knowledge. I'm representing you 100% in this transaction, okay? Now that you've hired me, if any buyer walks in and wants to buy your home, and that buyer is represented by a Keller Williams Premier Realty agent, we will now find ourselves in what's called a dual agency situation. And that's down here on line 35. And what that means now is that since both parties are represented by the same brokerage, we can't advocate for one side to the detriment of the other because we represent both sides. So what really ends up happening is we become represent more of a limited representation role, and we just help bring both sides come together. Does that make sense? And typically the seller will say, yes, that makes sense. Okay. So again, you want to make sure that you're pointing out that we cannot advocate for one side to the detriment of the other. We're kind of just playing that limited representation middleman role, helping to bring both sides come together. Now, we do get a lot of questions like, you know, sometimes you'll get, well, I'm not really sure what that means. You could then go a little further and explain in a little greater detail, again, maybe giving an example. Hey, Mr. Seller, if I were sitting in the room with the buyer, I wouldn't be able to say to the buyer, hey, offer low on that house, because you wouldn't like me saying that, would you? And they would say no. And I would say, same as if I were talking to you, Mr. Seller, and I said, hey, we got this offer, I definitely counter because they can afford more as buyers. The buyer probably wouldn't want me to say that to you, would they? And so then they kind of get it, right? So They say, we just can't say those things. We still can advise, but we just do it in a different way, right? We ask more questions, we provide information, and we help you formulate what would be the best response to an offer. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. So then I go back to page 2 and I say, so, when you hire me, again, embedded command, when you hire me, I'm going to provide you all of these fiduciary responsibilities. I'm going to be loyal to your best interests at all times, even above my own. I am going to be obedient to what you would like me to do during this transaction and carry out all of those wishes as long as they're lawful. Disclosure, I obviously have to disclose to any clients all material facts. Anything about the property, that they would need to know that might affect their use and enjoyment of the home. And I always tell people, so if you tell me your toilet fell through the first floor into the basement, but you got it fixed, so there's no need to tell anybody, I would have to tell you, nope, I'm sorry, I have to disclose that, right? That's a material fact. Confidentiality, I owe you confidentiality. Protect all of your confidential information from here on forward. I will use reasonable care to do all of my duties as a real estate agent. And then the accounting, and I always tell people, not only will I go over the numbers of the offers with you or what it would cost for you to sell your property, I will also be accountable to any timelines that are part of the purchase agreement or the offer, okay? Making sure that we don't miss any timeline deadlines so we get to the closing table, okay? And then the last thing I want to point out is this notice of predatory offender information. If you're interested in any particular neighborhoods or where predatory offenders may live, you can go to the Department of Corrections website or call them directly to get that information. Okay? So that is the agency disclosure form. Anybody have any questions on that?
No.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, on to the official listing contract. Okay, so we are basically presenting this contract to our seller, right? To have them officially hire us to list their property. So the one thing I want to stress to you guys on all the forms, when you turn in your paperwork, your job, your number one job as a licensed agent, in my opinion, is to have these filled out correctly, right? And completely. Christina or whoever, whoever's doing your inputting of your listing into the MLS and reviewing your paperwork, they don't want it to come back to you guys and say, hey, you forgot a date, you forgot a property address. So do your job, look over all of your paperwork before you submit your packet and make sure everything is complete. And if there's a blank line that doesn't need to be filled out, put a line through it or put an NA in that spot, right? Don't leave blanks. So very key, we need the date that you are sitting down to have your sellers sign the contract, okay? The listing doesn't necessarily have to start that day, but this is the date that you're signing the contract, okay? So we want the date in there, and then the page numbers, that's also important. At the end, we want to, put the number of pages that are part of this listing contract in there, okay? So line 3, the physical address of the property. So 123 Main Street, city of Rochester, or whatever city, county of Olmsted, or whatever county, and then the zip code. All of that needs to be in there. And then line 6 is the legal description. So that's typically like lot and block, right? Or if it's a rural property, it's a pretty lengthy legal description, maybe southwest quarter acre of blah, 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 and it goes on and on and on. So if you don't have enough room in this legally described as area for your legal description, a lot of times I will put see attached, and then I will attach an addendum to the listing contract that has the full legal description, which, gives you a lot more room. Okay, but make sure that if you're saying see attached, there's actually an addendum attached. Make sense? Okay. So seller, we want to make sure that we're putting down their name. If it's an individual, great. Married couple, perfect. If it's a trust, you want the name of the trust. If it's a corporation, obviously the name of the corporation. And then the broker is Keller Williams Premier Realty. It's not Keller Williams. It's not KWPR. It's Keller Williams Premier Realty. Okay. And then line 9 is the actual date that the contract is going to start, that it will actually go live in the MLS. So if I meet with somebody today and I'm signing the paperwork, but they say, hey, we don't want this to hit until September 1st, then I can put the contract starts on September 1st. And then ends on, you have to have an expiration date. Now, there's no rules as far as when that expires. It could be a 5-year contract if your seller's willing to do that, right? But you have to have a start date and you have to have an end date. Okay. At any time.
What's a typical end date?
There is no typical end date. I mean, it's really how you want to run your business, right? Okay. I mean, some people do 3 months, some people do 6 months, some people do a year. Okay. It's really up to you and what the seller's willing to give you, right? Okay. So, and any questions, thanks Grady for jumping in, but if anybody has questions, just holler them, at any time. So line 13 basically is what's the price, right? What is the list price going to be? And we're going to enter that on a line 13. And then line 14, where it says terms, what that means is, what is the seller willing to accept for the terms in terms of cash, conventional financing, FHA, VA, all of that stuff. What are they willing to accept as a term for the price? Make sense? So you'll want to list those things there. And then obviously you're going to put that in the MLS when you load that information in. Now lines 15 through 24 are pretty important. And I think a lot of people skip over this, right? When they meet they're like, okay, we're going to put this in the MLS and you're going to keep me, up to date with what's going on in the property. And then that's all. And they blow through. Or maybe they say, we're going to put a sign up in the yard. We're going to put a lockbox on the property and it's going to go in the MLS. Okay. Well, there's a lot more to this paragraph and I've highlighted some of those things. So what this is saying is the seller is giving you the exclusive right to sell the property, which means they can't list with anybody else, and that's awesome. They know you're going to put a for sale sign and a lockbox with keys to the property. This contract does not give the broker authority to rent or manage without a management contract in place, okay? Other important things, broker may give information to the MLS concerning the property. So the seller is acknowledging that. The seller also acknowledges that we're going to place information on the internet concerning the property unless they tell us not to, right? Which is part of what we're going to talk about next on this form. And upon final acceptance of a purchase agreement, they're allowing us to withdraw the property from the market, right? When we mark it pending, it becomes kind of disabled from an active or from a public website situation. And then we're going to also notify the MLS of the price and the terms of the sale once we, have it closed. Okay. And then this also says that the Minnesota Association of Realtors basically are held harmless from, we're not insuring anything in regards to the seller against theft or loss or vandalism. Okay, so those are some important things in a very small paragraph that you need to make sure that you're going over with your seller, okay? So that they understand what you're doing when you list this property and what it means to put a property in the MLS, okay? The next section, we're gonna talk about those MLS data feeds. So when we put a property in the MLS, our North Star MLS has a contract with a ton of websites, right? For them to do a data pull from our MLS to their websites. So the common ones are Realtor.com, Zillow, Trulia, and there's a lot of other ones, right? So those websites are referred to as virtual office websites, okay? So this next section of the listing contract allows the seller to have options in regards to how that data is pulled to those websites, okay? So option 1 that you give them is, do you want your home to be pulled to these sites? Number 1, are you okay with your with your listing being on the internet. And so they can say yes or no. And obviously, if they say no, their home will not be on the internet, okay? You may share information about the listing with, by other means versus email, whatever, fax, delivery, blah, 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 but you can't have it on the internet, okay? And again, I'm going to remind you guys, our job is not to make the decisions for them. Our job is to present each option and give them the pros and the cons and answer their questions so that they can make the best decision for themselves, okay? Option 2, do they want their listing address to be displayed on the internet? So the house and the street name, house numbers and street name, okay? So yes or no. Option 3, do they want those automated valuations to be posted next to their listing? So all of us are very familiar with Zillow and their Zestimate, right? And we know that sometimes that's not accurate, and sometimes it is. We don't know. So this is giving the seller the opportunity to say, do they want to have an automated valuation next to their listing on some of these sites? Okay. And then option 4, there are some websites that will allow people to come in and write comments or reviews. I personally don't even know of any. I honestly don't know that I'm aware of a site, but they must exist because it's part of our state contract. But it would allow someone to go in and go, yeah, I saw that property. I hated the room that was painted purple, or it was a great location, had beautiful views, right? So they can go in and write a review. Is your seller okay with being on those websites and having those reviews displayed? Okay, so they get those 4 options, and you're going to check yes or no depending on what they want. Line 73 through 77 just says that this property, is this property or is this not property currently listed for lease? If it's not, you're obviously going to check is not, and then you're going to go to line 74 and say, does the seller have the right? They may or they may not list the property for lease during the terms of this contract with another broker. So it is legal for them to have the property listed with you for sale and list with another brokerage. I mean, that's perfectly legal, but in this contract, this is where you're going to have the discussion. Are you going to try to lease it, at the same time as try to sell it? And if not, that's great. If they are, is it going to be with another brokerage, or are you going to require that they do it with Keller? Okay. Questions on that? Okay, awesome. Moving on. Okay, the next page is the important page. This is what's telling the seller what their obligation is through this listing contract period, okay? And again, I really think a lot of people do not explain this properly. So if you guys do not know these contracts, then you are, in my opinion, in default of your license, and you should not be practicing real estate. So really read these contracts and get to know what they say, because that is the bulk of what you're responsible for, right? So you're telling the seller that, bottom line, it is your responsibility to, number 1, notify us of any relevant information important to the sale of your property, right? You need to promptly inform me of any inquiries that you receive about the property, right? Because you want to follow up on those. You don't want to leave a potential buyer hanging out there when you could potentially procure a sale, right? It says that the seller agrees to provide and pay for any inspections and reports required by like a governmental authority. Now, we don't have a ton of those down here, but I think up in the metro area, there are certain things that have to be done prior to listing a property, certain inspections, certain things that you have to get. So if you live in an area where some of those things are typically required by the county or the state before you sell, this is just saying to the seller, you're responsible for paying for those and getting those done, okay? If they live in a situation where there are association documents, the seller is agreeing to provide those for you so that you can provide those to a buyer. They're going to be responsible for maintaining the security, the maintenance, the utilities, and the insurance on the property while you have it listed. We don't want them to just stop because they think they're selling their house, right? And they're going to surrender any abstract if they have that, or any copy of any owner's title insurance policy that they have, so that you have it and you can provide it to the title company, to get that updated. Okay. The seller, you're also telling the seller that you will do whatever is necessary to convey marketable title, on the day of closing. So when the title company does a search, if there's a blemish or something that needs to be cleared up, you're going to do everything necessary to get that cleared up so that we can pass on marketable title to the buyer. Okay. The seller is also agreeing to sign all documents necessary to do that. And bottom line, the biggest one, line 89, the seller is letting you know that they have the legal right to sell this property. Okay. Now they're also going to grant access to the property. The seller is authorizing you to access the property, to authorize other brokers or inspectors or appraisers to come and do what they need to do through the process. And they're also giving you access or authorization to duplicate keys, right? So a lot of times when I take a listing and they give me one key, I'll go make a duplicate key and keep it in my office just in case somebody loses or drops or puts something in their pocket and walks off and forgets to put it back in the lockbox. And I'll tell you guys, that actually happened to me. I was locking a door and I dropped it, and between the front stoop and the door, there was a nice big crack and the key went straight down. So it does happen, maybe intentional or unintentionally. But having that extra key then handy that you can run back out and put in the lockbox is probably a good thing. Okay. They are also authorizing to allow the above referenced persons to enter the property with or without a licensed salesperson. So years ago, during an inspection, we always had to be there the full time because we were the licensed representative and the inspector wasn't. As long as everybody's okay with that, without you being there or a representative being there, this is saying they're okay with that. Okay. They're also authorizing you to provide any security codes. Sometimes people just have those front door locks with the little code. This is saying, hey, seller, you're okay with me providing those agencies or appraisers or whatever the code if I need to do that to let them get in. Okay. They're going to commit no act. The seller is agreeing to commit no act which might obstruct people getting in there to do their jobs for the transaction. Okay. Also, the seller, if let's say they have tenants in the property, you're selling a rental property for a seller, they are going to provide proper notice to any tenants of showings that are happening. And then they are also agreeing that prospective buyers and other authorized to access the property may record the property by photograph, video, or other medium. So what that means is basically if buyers come in, they know that if a buyer comes in, the buyer might be taking pictures or recording the property just so they can remember, things about the home. Okay. So that little chunk of this whole seller or listing agreement, that says a lot of stuff. That's the meat of this listing agreement. Okay. I know there's important things elsewhere in regards to how we get paid and blah, 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 and that's important to the seller. But this is important so the seller knows what they're signing on for, right? So make sure you're going through these key things when you're doing your listing presentation. Okay, any questions on that? Awesome. Line 103, you need to make sure that you let the seller know that they can record video all day long whenever they want while this is on the market for sale. What they cannot do is record oral conversations. So they can only do video. They cannot record any oral conversations without written consent from at least one of the parties. Okay. So for instance, if Melanie has a listing and I'm bringing my buyer in, if she wants to record our conversation, she has to get my consent or the buyer's consent, one of us, to do that before the showing. Okay. Doesn't mean she can't, but I would just need to consent, or my buyer would need to consent to have her record. And then obviously, if you ever get asked to give consent, you need to let your client know that your conversations are being recorded. Okay. Any questions on that? Awesome. The next section just talks about seller content license. So basically, if the seller ever wants to provide you with photographs, or they want to provide you with information to use for your listing, what this is saying is they warrant that they have the right to do that, and that basically we're going to use it for marketing purposes and whatnot. So they need to make sure that they have the authorization to provide us that information for marketing purposes. Okay. The next section is also very important, right? This is probably what most sellers think is the most important part of the listing contract, and that's all about the compensation and how we get paid. So, broker's compensation, line 16. Are you an agent that charges an upfront retainer fee? We have every right to do that. The majority probably don't, but you absolutely do have a right to do that. And I could see doing that if you have a really unique property, or a property that might take a really long time, or might require additional expenditures from a marketing standpoint, maybe a real high-end property or a commercial property. That might be some, instance where you might want to collect a retainer fee up front, so that covers some of your expenses. And then obviously that can be applied to the commission, at the end. But if for some reason the property didn't sell, you would at least have covered some of those costs up front with that retainer fee. Okay, so that's the benefit of a retainer fee. If you do not collect one, you'll put 0 in there. If you do, you'll put what you collect for the retainer fee. Line 119, the seller shall pay broker either a percentage for you to sell the property, or a flat rate. So again, depending on how you want to run your business, there's no right or wrong. It's what you choose to do. You will fill in the percentage if you choose a percentage, or the flat rate if you choose the flat rate. Okay. And basically, by signing this, the seller is saying, I agree to pay the broker if the property is sold during the contract period. Okay. Okay, moving on. This is the big kicker. In addition, if before this contract expires, the broker presents a buyer who is willing and able to buy the property at the price and terms required or stated in this contract, but the seller refuses to sell, seller shall still pay the broker the same compensation. Okay? So that is key, you guys. If they said they want to list their house for $200,000 and they're willing to accept cash, conventional, and FHA financing, and you bring an offer that's $200,000 cash or conventional or FHA financing, and they refuse to sell it because it's the neighbor and he doesn't like the neighbor and he doesn't want to sell it, they still owe you that compensation of your fee because you've done your job. Okay? So they need to know that. If I bring you an offer for $200,000 and it's cash and you refuse to sell, you need to know I've done my job and you will be paying a brokerage commission, okay? The other line I highlighted on 130 is the seller agrees to pay the broker's compensation in full upon the happening of any of the following. Number 1, we actually get to closing. You're going to pay me. Number 2, you refuse to close the sale. So we get to the closing and now, Mr. Seller, you're refusing to sign paperwork. You're still going to owe the brokerage, our brokerage fee. Or number 3, you refuse to sell at the price or the terms specified above in the contract. Okay? So that's really important, you guys. And this is like the teeth in the listing agreement, because otherwise, why do we have contracts if there's no teeth in it, right? People sign contracts and think, oh, big deal. I'm changing my mind. I'm canceling. We have to build value into what we do and why we have contracts, right? So you want to set the expectations with your seller. Here's the deal. I'm going to be doing a lot of work. I'm going to be doing a lot of marketing to find buyers. And when I do, and it's at the right terms and the right, price, we're going to move forward. And if not, you're still going to owe me my fee. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. So the next section, 134, talks about that override clause that maybe you guys learned in your classes, right? And that is if the contract expires, okay, and I didn't find a buyer, I am going to provide the seller on line 140 a list of any prospective buyers that I brought through the property within 72 hours of expiration of this contract. And if anyone on that list comes to you after the fact and now wants to buy the property and you want to sell it to one of them, you will still allow me to represent you and you will be paying me my fee. Okay. Now, the caveat to that is if they relist with another company, all bets are off. As soon as they sign a new listing contract, you can just rip that list up of buyers and throw it away. Okay. But if they haven't relisted and that property remains off the market, if one of those buyers on your list within the amount of time that you fill in on line 134, which I always do the max, 180 days, 6 months. If one of them comes back to the seller and says, hey, I saw it and now I've changed my mind, I want to move forward, that seller will allow you to represent them and move forward and pay you a brokerage fee. Make sense? Okay. Now, the other thing I want to point out is on line 134, the tail end of that, it says that the seller agrees to sell the property to anyone who obviously was on that list or during this contract made an inquiry of the seller that they did not tell you about. Okay. So if you find out that they had the property listed and their neighbor said, hey, if you don't sell it through Kelly, I'll buy it from you. And then they wait till the contract expires and then they sell it to their neighbor. And I find out that which granted, I'd have to find this out, right? But if I find out that they worked that out, the seller would be due compensation to the brokerage, or they would have to pay it. Make sense? So there's a lot of teeth in this section of the listing agreement that you need to make sure you're going over with your sellers. Okay. Any questions on that? Perfect. The next section talks about that compensation that we get and how we're going to share that with other cooperating brokerages. Okay. So line 147 says, are you going to be sharing part of your compensation with cooperating brokers? So if you check shall, then you're going to go through lines 148 and 148 through 154 in regards to how you're going to share that. Okay. So I'm going to just, for the example purposes, say if I charge 6% to list your property, of that 6%, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I am going to check line 149 and I'm going to share 3% of the gross sale price to any cooperating broker who's fully representing the buyer. Okay. Now I only pay out, and you guys can do whatever you want, but I only pay out 1% to a cooperating brokerage if they are only facilitating for a buyer, right? Because they're not fully representing them. They end up not really doing a whole lot of work and I end up doing more work. So I only pay 1% out. And so I would put that in on line 151. I would check that box as well. And I would put 1% of the gross sale price to cooperating brokers assisting the buyer, not representing the buyer. Okay, makes sense? And if there's anything else that you're going to do in a, maybe a unique fashion, I'm going to give a bonus, I'm going to do whatever, blah, blah, blah. You might want to write that in on line 153. And just basically what this is you're disclosing to the seller how you are going to compensate the other brokerages when they bring you a buyer. Okay, and it's their right to know, because bottom line, if most other brokerages are offering 3% in the MLS for brokerages to bring a buyer, and you're only going to do 2%, that seller needs to know, right? That they might be at a disadvantage as opposed to other sellers in the market. Any questions on that?
Nope.
Awesome. Okay, next section, closing services. You guys need to know that you do not have the right to tell a seller where they close, right? So I would always tell you, you always you should ask, right? Do you have a preference where we close when we find the buyer? Some sellers will say, yeah, I closed at Rochester Title last time. They were great. I'd love to close there. Maybe it's someone who's selling for the first time and doesn't, they might say, well, we don't care. Do you have a recommendation? You could always give them a couple recommendations, right? But it's ultimately their choice. And what I always do, just because if you're dealing with several people and it's hard to remember, I always say, find out who they want to close with. And when I know, I write it right here in this kind of this margin area or down here. I might just write Rochester Title in there or, Ole Law Office or whoever, wherever they want, just so that when I need to remember where they're closing, I can go back and pull my listing contract and remember where they close. Okay. But then the question is, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you want to close at Rochester Title. Would you like me to arrange for the closing and get them all of the paperwork, that they need to, prepare for the closing? Or would you like to do that? And most of the time they'll go, well, you can do that, right? So then I would have them check the line 164. If they want to do it, then you would check line 165. Okay, but again, it's their choice where they close, not yours. And if they ask for recommendations, I would always give them more than one, just so ultimately they're choosing, right? Because if there's ever a bad experience and you were the one that recommended it, obviously now it's a bad reflection on you guys. So kind of, we always say CYA, right? Cover your butt. Okay, next page. Again, I'm going to remind you guys, see where it says property located at? That's on the top of every page. Make sure your property address is on every page of your listing contract, because if one page gets misplaced or whatever, or displaced, we need to know that that goes with this full listing contract. So always have your property addresses and the date and whatnot on the pages. Okay, additional costs. Your seller needs to know that there's additional costs outside of brokerage fees when it comes to selling a house. So if you guys don't provide a net sheet, you should, to your sellers, and it goes over, the fees that they'll have through the county or the state, and through the title company. They're going to want to be aware of what those costs are when they sell a house, so they know what their net will be when they walk away. Okay. This is also, a good time to ask them too, if they have a mortgage on the property. Do you have a mortgage that will need to be paid off? Do you know how much that is? Because you can factor that into your net sheet. Okay. And it also gives you a good indication. Are we in a good situation with where they're going to price their house and what they owe? Is it really tight? If an offer comes in less, would we be in a short sale situation? So it gives you a lot of information to know if they have a mortgage and what the balance is. Okay, next section, Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. If your seller is not a citizen of the United States, there is going to be some taxes that need to be withheld before they get their proceeds when they sell. Okay, so by law, they need to disclose if they are a foreign individual of another country and not a US citizen. And this is where they would do that. Okay. They will also do it on the seller's disclosure, but you want to make sure you're getting that information too, because you need to know that so that you notify the title company as well. And the whole reason for this, if you guys are not aware of what FIRPTA is or this act, is it was enacted because foreign individuals would sell a property and then head back to the country they're from without paying the US government. And the US government says, well, we still need our money. So, hey, Mr. Buyer, you own the property now. Now you're going to pay it. Right? So we want to make sure that we're telling everybody what the situation is so that the seller is, paying those taxes. Okay, line 183. Hey, Mr. Seller, there are warranty programs out there available that you can either attach to the property while we market it for sale as an incentive. Those warranty programs cover the mechanical systems of your house and your appliances for the first year that the buyer would own the property, but it will also cover you during your listing period. Is that something that you're interested in? Number one. And if not, just know that when a buyer offers on your home, there's a section in the purchase agreement that discusses home warranty programs, and they get to choose if they want one as part of their offer. And if so, they get to choose who's paying for it. So, you know, we will be addressing that one way or another when we get to an offer, but, you know, it is something that we can offer ahead of time. Okay. And if you guys are not familiar with these home warranty programs, there's a lot of literature I know in the Rochester office. I don't know about the ancillary market centers if you guys have that on hand, but, you know, grab one of the brochures, read through it, call one of the representatives, you know, have them talk you through it. And so you understand and you can, you know, best advise your clients on what the pros and cons are of those programs. Okay. Now, the next section is all about dual agency. So remember in our agency disclosure, we told them what dual agency was. Here's where they get to decide if they want to be in a dual agency situation or not. So you get to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you know, are you okay with being in a dual agency situation? And if they say no, then, which is great, that's fine. Then your job is to say, not a problem. I just need to let you know that I will be notifying the 157 agents that we have in our office that they cannot bring their buyers to your listing, because that would be putting you in a potential dual agency situation. And so, you know, just so you know, that's what happens, you know, when you're not okay with dual agency. Okay. And if they are okay with it, you know, either way, they're going to check the box that they prefer. And then everybody signs in this box. Okay. No matter what the option is, everybody signs. Make sense? Okay. And if you guys do find that you are in that situation, you do need to notify every agent in our office, our broker and all of our agents, of your listing that will not accept dual agency, so that we are all aware and we don't set up showings. Okay. Because we will be in default then. Okay. Line 207 is just saying, hey, Mr. Seller, there are other sellers that might list their property and choose our brokerage to do so while you also have your property on the market for sale. Okay. Line 210, we're going to list your house, and I might be doing an open house, and in walks a buyer that at one point in time I had under contract. Okay. I still owe that buyer the fiduciary responsibility of confidentiality. I am legally required to keep information regarding their price, terms, you know, that they would accept or want when they buy a house, confidential. Okay. I can share everything else, but I just can't share their confidential information about price and terms. Okay. Which is a really good segue into line 214, termination of fiduciary duties. You can say, when we sell your property, or if this contract expires, that's when those fiduciary responsibilities will terminate, with exception to confidentiality. I owe you that forever and ever and ever. Okay. Indemnification on line 217, this paragraph just says that the seller is, you know, agrees to hold Keller Williams harmless from any, you know, liability, any injury, any loss, vandalism, anything stolen during this period. Line 223, that paragraph talks about fair housing, and that Mr. Seller, we cannot discriminate against anybody who wants to purchase your home. If they are qualified and they have the money to do so, we have to sell it to them. Line 227 says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you are basically guaranteeing me that you have not received any additional notices from any governmental agency of anything that would affect the use and enjoyment of your property. And if you have, I would need to know that. And if you do, while we have this property listed, you will need to notify me right away. Okay. Line 231, I think, gets skipped a lot. This is also important, because this right here, by signing this listing agreement, they're giving you written notice, giving you permission to obtain any mortgage information, balance, interest rate, payoff, or whatever, so that you understand the full scope of the situation. Okay. Line 234, we're signing this listing contract today, but if anything changes and we have to do an amendment to the listing contract, that still becomes part of the entire agreement, even though it's signed at a later date. Also, any other written or oral communication between you and I does not constitute a legal part of this contract. So it would need to be drafted on an amendment or an addendum, right? You can't just take an email and have that be part of the contract. It has to be signed by both parties. Make sense? Awesome. 239, electronic signatures are acceptable in Minnesota, so we may be using those, obviously, throughout the transaction. And then line 241, the seller is giving you authorization to contact them, you know, through whatever means necessary throughout the transaction. And then the last page, line 244, you're going to put the property address again. And then 245 through 247, if there's anything, you know, unique that you want to add or something, you know, an additional caveat to the listing agreement that you want to add, here's a perfect place to do that. And then signatures, right? So the one thing I want to stress for signatures, again, that all of this is completed. We need names, we need full addresses, we need phone numbers, we need email addresses. And the reason being is that, let's say you have a property listed and you're on vacation, or God forbid, something tragic happens to you and now we have to get a hold of your client for some reason. This is an easy way. We just pull a copy of the listing agreement and we have the contact information there, and it's just easy for everybody. Okay, so make sure that this is all complete. Any questions on the listing contract? Awesome,
Nope.
you guys are rock stars, I love it. Okay, next page, wire fraud alert. We have sellers sign this. Basically it's stating, and this is a form that the state wants us to provide to all of our clients, that, hey, if anybody's asking you to give your account information or you know, routing information for your bank accounts via an email, don't do it, right? I mean, call them first, say, hey, is this really you asking for this information? Most of the time, if a lender would ever ask that information, it's probably going to be in an encrypted email, and they will call you first and notify you or let you know that they're sending this email. So, you know, there's a lot of wire fraud alert, or I mean, there's a lot of wire fraud out there. So this is just telling you, be very careful and do not give personal information via email. Okay, and we have them sign it. Okay. So you have the listing contract, but you have some additional information, you need some extra room, or I'll go back to the example I gave you, earlier, the legal description is really long and you didn't have a place to write that in the regular listing contract body. So we're going to do an addendum to the listing contract. An addendum versus an amendment, you guys got to keep this straight. An addendum is something that is filled out at the same time you are doing the initial contract. It is added to the contract, and that's why it's referred to as an addendum. Once we fill out the contract and it's completed, if we change anything or add anything later, it's done on an amendment. We are amending the initial contract. Okay, so the date of the contract, I am adding something the day that I'm with the seller, I'm going to do it on this addendum. Okay, and then again, they would sign and I would sign. If we are amending the contract later, and you want to make a change, maybe we're changing, the contract date, or not necessarily a sale price. You don't have to do this every time, but maybe there's an amendment. Maybe they decided that the neighbor wants to sell it and you've agreed to maybe do a different commission split or something like that, right? You could amend the contract after the fact on an amendment, and then all parties would sign. Okay, make sense? Everybody knows the difference? Addendum, amendment.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay, now another form you need for your listing packet is the Keller Williams Premier Realty disclosures and waivers and notices for the seller. So the top one, you're just letting the seller know, hey, I am a licensed real estate agent. I am not an attorney. I am not a tax accountant. I'm not an inspector. So, if you need advice in regards to how this sale may affect you in those arenas, you need to consult with those professionals. I am only licensed to sell your property and help you get your property sold. And again, they're going to initial on all these and they're going to sign at the bottom. So If they want to host or have you host an open house at any time, they have to initial here to give us the authorization to do that. Affiliated business arrangement just says that the owners, some owners in our Keller Williams Market Center also have ownership in Partners Title, which is in our office. So we have to disclose that obviously there's a financial gain for the owners of our company if your clients decide to close with Partners Title. So you just have to disclose that relationship. Again, they can choose whoever they want, so you're not telling them they have to close with Partners Title, but if they do, obviously, the owners will make some, have a financial benefit from that. Commission, in addition to the agreed upon commission stated in the contract, the seller is also agreeing to pay that broker administrative commission, okay, of $3.99. And here's where they will initial there. So one thing I want to point out to you guys, and I probably should go back, I'm going to scoot back a few pages. I usually put this in my listing contract where we start talking about the compensation. Let me find that for you. So, where are we? Right here. So when I do my contract, I fill in my percentage that I charge. And under other, I usually write in the $3.99 broker administrative commission. So I've already explained that to them and what it is and what it's for when we go through the bulk of the listing contract. So then when I get back to this form, I say, this is just, again, referencing that you're paying that 6% commission or whatever your commission is, plus that $3.99. And then the initial. Okay. Multiple offer. By initialing here, they are giving you the authorization to disclose to everybody that they are in a multiple offer situation when you're in that situation. Okay. If they do not initial or they refuse to initial there, then you do not have the right to disclose that. Okay. Now they can change their mind later, then you just want to get that changed, right, or initialed. Internet use of images. They're initialing here saying that once you put this on the MLS and it goes to the internet, someone might see a picture of their kitchen and love it and use it in their article about remodeling kitchens, right? You have no control over the use of the images on the internet from anybody else. And then seller advertising, initialing here, basically you need to say, hey, if you're going to advertise, let me do the advertising. That's what you're paying me to do, to market your home. But if for some reason you feel the need that you need to advertise it, maybe in your church newsletter or your company, newsletter, you need to include the broker's name and contact information. Okay. It has to be provided in that advertisement once it's a listed property. So I usually just tell my clients, hey, I will share a state compliant link with you to your home that you can share out with anybody. That way we just know it's compliant, and that way I know I make sure I get my contact information in there. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, so we have them initial everything, and then we have them sign at the bottom. All right, the next section is about lead-based paint. So if your property that you are going to list was built before 1978, it has the potential of having lead-based paint. Doesn't mean it does, but it could potentially have lead-based paint in it, okay? So your seller would have to fill out a lead-based paint disclosure, okay? This information should always be provided, this brochure from the EPA on lead-based paint should always be provided to both seller and potential buyers. Okay, now obviously if you're representing the buyer, you'd want to provide it. If the agent representing the buyer is bringing you an offer, they should be providing this information to the buyer. Okay, so it just explains the risks of lead-based paint. So everybody knows what the risks could potentially be, so that when they do look at that lead-based paint disclosure, the buyer can make an informed decision as to if they want to have the paint tested in the home or if they want to waive the opportunity to test that, okay? That's why we provide them this information. So from a seller standpoint, let me get to the disclosure here. This is a long brochure, okay. When we get to the lead-based paint disclosure, what that is basically the seller is going to disclose if they have any knowledge, records, or reports that would pertain to any lead-based paint in their home. So they would check line 16 if they did not have any knowledge, or they would check line 18 if they did, and then obviously they would want to provide any documentation that they have if they have it. Okay? Then, and I usually have this filled out ahead of time, even though it's typically, when you look at line 3, it's typically presented with an offer. I just don't date it. I don't fill in this date on line 3. I just fill in the date on line 1 when we're completing it. And then I have the seller address line 16 or 18, and then I make it available on the MLS as, as part of the disclosure information that I provide. Okay. So then when a buyer wants to make an offer on that house, they can print that out, and then they will fill out either line 28 or line 30. So either they waive their opportunity to test the paint, or they receive a 10-day opportunity to do a risk assessment on the paint. Okay. And then line 52 through 54 just says that the real estate licensee has informed the seller of their obligation. So this is saying, you have told the seller they're obligated to, disclose what they know. Okay, and then everybody signs it. So sellers will sign and you'll sign, and then obviously when you get the offer from the buyer, they'll sign it and they'll put the purchase agreement date at the top. Make sense? And again, this is only for properties built before 1978. Okay, then obviously your seller has to do a disclosure statement as well, right? They have to disclose what they know. Now there is this form, which is the disclosure statement, seller's property disclosure statement. There is also a disclosure alternatives form, which is basically just disclosing the bare minimum, but in essence saying, I'm really not disclosing anything about the property. Get an inspection if you want, or all parties agree to just waive the right of disclosure, right? So that's a class in itself we should do just on the alternatives form, because there's some risk with that. But if your sellers live in that property and they know enough about that property, they should be using this form more often than not. Okay. So this is a full disclosure from the seller of what they know about the property. They're not required to go have inspections done or have assessments done to find out more information. It's just about what they know about their property currently. So what's really important about this one from your standpoint is we as agents do not fill this out for them. Okay, we don't fill it out and send it to them for signature. They fill it out. It should be in their own writing, so that there is no liability on your end for having put words in their mouth or, disclosed anything on their behalf. Okay, so if they fill this out and get it to you and there are things missing, you give it back to them and you say, hey, you're missing line 10, you're missing line 30, whatever it is. I need you to fill those out. Okay. And I know it can be a pain. It might be easy sometimes, especially with elderly clients, to just sit down with them and go through it with them, which is a little time consuming, but again, it's part of your service. But that way it gets done correctly. Okay. But everything should be addressed in here. So you want to make sure that when they hand this in, that you're going through it yourself, and if there's something missing, you get that corrected. One thing I do want to point out is on page, I think it's page 4. Yes. Okay. So page 4, lines 41 or 141. People do this wrong all the time. So I always explain to the sellers, hey guys, when you get to this section, these are things that could potentially be in your house. You may not have all of them in your home. So what this is asking is it in working order? Yes or no? If you do not have this physically on your property, you're going to check the NA box. So NA, I don't have one, or if I have it, yes, it's in working order, or no, it's not in working order. Okay, and that's how they'll address these items. Any questions on that? Okay, now this is the other form, you guys, that you're gonna get a lot of questions on. So if you don't know what this stuff means, learn. Google it, figure it out so that when they ask you the question, you can answer intelligently on what it's asking. Okay. So one of the other things I want to point out is if they get to this section right here on septic systems and wells, and they check that they do, so seller does know of a subsurface sewage treatment, which is just fancy for septic system, or seller does know of a well on the property, it says right here, see disclosure statement for subsurface sewage treatment, or see disclosure statement for well. So then they will need to fill out those disclosure statements as well. Okay, so if they have a well or septic, they need this disclosure statement, and they need a septic disclosure statement and a well disclosure statement along with a location map. Okay, very important. So I'm just gonna show you what those look like once we get through this form. So again, they're gonna complete everything in its entirety. Here again is where they're asked if they're a foreign individual of another country. So we've asked it on the listing contract. They disclose it on the seller disclosure statement. So, you know, every buyer should be aware if this person is a foreign individual or not. So I'm not going to go through all the questions here. I'm just going to let you know that it's very important that they fill it out and that they fill it out completely. And if there's something missing, that you guys go back and get it completed. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, awesome. And then the seller will sign here, and then we make this available on the MLS. You can upload this as an or a supplement that is available to any potential buyer, which if you guys know your job, you know that this has to be in the hands of a buyer before they can present an offer to you. Okay, or basically before an offer is even written, really. They have the right to see this. So don't make buyer's agents scramble and call you and have you send it to them because they've got a buyer waiting to write an offer and now they've got to wait for you to get this to them. Get it filled out before your listing goes active so that you can upload this as a document to the listing, and it's available to all the agents who are bringing their buyers to take a look. Make sense? Awesome. And so when they present you with an offer, they will print out a copy of this, and then the buyer will sign on 434 acknowledging that they got a copy of it. Okay, and then the last couple pages of the disclosure statement talk about radon. So that is something too that you want to have a discussion with your seller. You know, have you guys ever tested for radon? That is part of the disclosure statement. They will fill that out. You know, they need to know that potential buyers nowadays, most of them are gonna probably test for radon, so be prepared for that. You know, you can also talk to your sellers about, you know, do you want to have the house pre-inspected and have it pre-tested for radon, you know, before a buyer comes along. So those are all discussions you should be having with your sellers when you're ready to list or getting ready to list a house. Okay, so this is that subsurface sewage treatment system disclosure or septic system disclosure that would need to be filled out if they have a septic system. Just talks all about the type of system they have, the drain field, all of that good stuff, who's done the work on it, you know, who's serviced it in the past. They would sign it, and then obviously the buyers would sign it as well when they present their offer. And then this is the well disclosure statement. So same thing, talks about the well depth, the well type, any other information about the well. They would sign it, and then the buyer would sign it when they present an offer. Okay, and then here's the location map. Your seller should be doing a nice little drawing of where their house is and where the well and where the septic system sits on that property, so that it gives the buyer an indication of where those systems are. Okay, and then everybody initials. So your seller will initial when you take the listing, when they fill this out, and then a buyer will initial that they saw this when they present you with an offer. Okay, so again, this is just a basic listing packet. You might have some additional things that are attached, you know, depending on the type of property or the situation. But again, go back, and I'm going to go all the way to the front. Go back to this checklist, you know, kind of as a good indication of what you might need, you know, or what might be applicable. Any questions at all on the listing paperwork that I can answer for you guys here before we sign off?
When you present this to sellers, do you actually have it highlighted like that?
No, I don't. I did that for
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really highlight anything. And actually, it's funny. When I used to do the agency disclosure, I would like underline the seller's broker. And our legal counsel said, don't be highlighting anything on there because we don't want to make it look like we were leading them to have to choose one thing or another. You know, it's their
Gotcha.
choice. So try not to do anything, especially on the agency disclosure. I don't care what you do on the listing contract, but certainly don't do anything on the agency disclosure. But if you feel you want to highlight those things, have at it. Okay.
Okay.
I highlighted them because I think they get glossed over and people don't, you know, there's a lot of agents out there practicing real estate, you guys, that don't even know these contracts and they don't even know what they're having their clients sign. And all is good until it's not, right? Until there's a problem and you're before a hearing and this seller saying that's not how she explained it to me or that's not what she said, and they're going to err on the side of the consumer, not you, you know, because you're a licensed agent. You guys should know this stuff backward and forward. These are legal documents that could cost you tens of thousands of dollars in fines, you know. So that's why I always tell you guys, time block in your week to learn your forms and practice your forms and practice writing out fake listing agreements, right? Practice presenting to your wife or your husband or your friend or whatever, and get used to just doing this and explaining it so that it just becomes so natural and normal when you actually do have to go in front of a client. Now you don't feel all nervous and wigged out because you've practiced it 100 times and you've really learned these forms front and back. Okay. Any questions from anyone else? Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you guys joining me for this class. Certainly, if anything comes up afterwards and you have questions or I can help in any way with you completing your forms, certainly reach out because this is an important thing for me. I'm really passionate about you guys knowing this stuff. So don't hesitate to reach out, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right, you guys, have a great day.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right, bye-bye.